Start.
Good evening. Namaste. Welcome to this INDICA Center for Bharatiya Languages conversation with Professor Girish Nath Jha ji. He's currently the chairman of the Commission for Scientific and Technical Terminology. This INDICA CBL conversation intends to put the spotlight on, amongst other things, the research findings in Dr. Jha's paper, some remarks on the origin and development of Indian languages and linguistic area, which was published in the book Perspectives on the Origins of Indian Civilization that Dr. Jha edited along with another scholar, Angela Marcantonio. His research findings in this paper are likely to be of interest to those concerned with questions related to the origin of languages in the Indian subcontinent. Professor Girish Nath Jha ji, who has joined us, is currently, as I said, the chairman of the Commission for Scientific and Technical Terminology, CSTT, of Ministry of Education, Government of India. He is a professor of computational linguistics at JNU at the School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies. He is also a concurrent faculty at the School of Engineering, Center of Linguistics, and at the Special Center of E-Learning in JNU. Professor Jha has served as the chairperson of the Special Center of Sanskrit Studies, JNU, and was a founding dean of the School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies at JNU. He has also held the position of the Director of International Collaboration and as coordinator of Ayurveda Biology Program at JNU. His research interests include Indian languages, corpora and standards, Sanskrit and Hindi linguistics, lexicography, science and technology in Sanskrit, machine translation, e-learning, web-based technologies, RDBMS techniques, software design, and localization. Details of his work can be obtained from the web link sanskrit.jnu.ac.in. Professor Jha has done collaborative research with the Center for Indic Studies, Dartmouth, as Mukesh and Preeti Chater Distinguished Professor of History of Science during 2009 to 12. He was awarded Dart Fellowship in 2014 and 2016 to teach digital humanities and Indology at University of Würzburg, Germany, and has been a visiting professor at the University of Florence in the summer of 2016. He has also been awarded the prestigious Dattapitha Asthana Vidwan Award for Sanskrit. His work on revival of Sharada script earned him the KECSS Felicitation Award. Professor Jha did his MA, MPhil, and PhD in linguistics, computational linguistics from JNU, and then got another master's degree in linguistics, natural language interface from University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, USA in 1999. He's published widely. He has over 138 research papers, presentations, and publications, and over 240 talks. He has supervised 38 PhD and 40 MPhil students so far. He's also served at several consultancies, including the likes of Google, Nuance, and more. Professor Jha has completed several sponsored projects for Indian language technology development and has led a consortium of 17 universities and institutes for developing corpora and standards for Indian languages. Thank you so much, Professor Jha, for making time today for this conversation. Welcome. I request you to unmute yourself so that we could continue with the conversation. Right. So thank you for joining us today. We can perhaps start this conversation with your current role. You're the chairman of the Commission for Scientific and Technical Technology, CSTT. I'm not sure everybody who's joined in might know that organization. So if you could help us understand what that organization does and what you do for them.
Thank you. Thank you, Meg, for this wonderful opportunity. I've known INDICA, but then, this is the first time I'm actually speaking from their platform. Thank you so much. Well, in my current role, I have this onerous task of creating vocabulary in all Indian languages. And by all, we mean, all Indian languages. There are hundreds of Indian languages, but primarily we focus on the scheduled Indian languages, which is 22.
Okay.
So scientific and technical terminology. And this organization was set up in 1961. And illustrious people have headed this organization before me. So I feel very proud to be here. And my job is to actually streamline the process of creating vocabulary and making sure everybody is able to access the vocabulary. And then create books, textbooks, with the help of the Granth academies in states, so that these textbooks can be used in school, colleges, and universities, so that we can actually teach our people in our languages. That is the bigger goal, actually.
That's wonderful. I think that dovetails very nicely with the focus on Bharatiya Bhashas as part of the NEP as well. So do you see an increased kind of a focus after the NEP particularly?
Yes, with NEP, and then the focus on teaching primary education in Indian languages. I will have to certainly, tie up with NCERT and other agencies to make sure the books are published, and they are published in our terminology. Ours is the official terminology.
Right. Right. I certainly noted that you used the word onerous, and I'm sure it is actually a very, very huge task. So my best wishes for that, and we really look forward to the volumes that come out from that. So thank you for helping us understand a bit about what you do currently over there. I must say that I was totally fascinated when I came across this book, which you have edited along with Angela Marcantonio ji, as I was researching some aspects of ancient India. It's called, for people who've not read it or who've not seen it, I'm just showing it up over here. It's called Perspectives on the Origin of Indian Civilization. And it was published first in 2013. And before I kind of request you to tell us how this book kind of came about, because you're one of the co-editors, I'd just like to read out from the jacket of the book, because I think it's very important what is written over here. So I read, quote, "The earliest Indian inscriptions date from the 3rd century before Christ. Archaeological and paleoanthropological evidence, as well as the Indian oral tradition, consistently point to the continuity of the Indian civilization back to a much earlier date. However, the question of the origin of Indian civilization prior to that period remains open. There are 3 main schools of thought in this regard. Proponents of the Indo-European theory suggest that the Sanskrit language and civilization were an intrusion into India from the West. Proponents of the continuity theory, on the contrary, believe that they arose locally. The 3rd school of thought proposes that the current scholarship is insufficient to trace the Sanskrit language and civilization back to prehistorical times, and that further research is required to develop a fair comparison between the European languages and Indian languages. Published literature in the field often reflects one or the other of these perspectives rather than offering an integrated view. This volume seeks to address this gap by proposing a possible resolution to this seemingly intractable issue." Unquote. I would love for you to share whatever you think or what you recollect from how this book came about before we get into your paper.
Thank you. Actually, we had organized an international symposium at the Center for Indic Studies, University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. So
Right.
UMass has 3 campuses. One of the campuses is at Dartmouth, which is about 90 miles from Boston, I believe. So we had this international symposium during the time when I was the visiting professor over there. And this was participated by about 10 eminent scholars, from all over the world. And the idea was to actually explore this whole, perspective from various angles, and then try to, kind of make sure we come to some conclusions. Right. And we had these scholars, Nicholas Kazanas, Konrad Els, and Angela herself. And then, Narhari Achar, Professor Achar was there, and
Right.
M.G. Prasad, Barzar P. Singh, and Jim Sheffer, Dine Lechensain, James Clarkson and Lina, etc. And all of them actually brought in perspectives from the language area and from the cultural continuity, history, and music and various aspects. And we tried to actually challenge the pre-existing views and theories, and try to kind of rationalize with the latest findings from various areas. And this symposium was a great success. And then the volume was published, as you mentioned, by DK Print World about 2 years later in 2013. The seminar was actually 2011, July, I remember. And then this volume has papers, actually one paper by Angela herself and another one by me. And then there's another paper by Clarkson on the language issue, and then the others are,
yes,
yeah, in different areas. So it went on very well, and we were hoping to get wider participation from Harvard University, because we hope that Harvard had a good Sanskrit department and they would send someone. And I guess towards the end, one professor did actually come and sat through the seminar. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for helping us understand the context. I particularly am hanging on to the word challenge, right? And I can see how that connects with at least the abstract of a paper now that we move from the book to the paper, right? And I'll just take the liberty to read out the abstract for the audience because they might not have the book or the paper with them in hand. And then maybe you could talk to your 5-part paper. There are 5 distinct parts in your paper, I noticed, before we go to the conclusions. And if you can talk to maybe 2 or 3 parts, the ones that you prefer for today's conversation, that would be great. So I'll just read out the abstract for the benefit of the audience. The paper, while presenting the linguistic scene in India and the well-known theories in Indian languages, language families, genealogies, and linguistic area, points out the inconsistencies in the existing models. To prove a point, the author considers selected data from 2 contemporary languages, Hindi and Bangla. And I will request you to please cover this. That would be my request as part of your presentation, the paper. 2 contemporary languages, Hindi and Bangla, and proves that one is a parent language of the other by using the argument of language change used by the classical comparative philologists. The section Languages of India talks about the Indian languages and language families in general, their constitutional position and the status of Sanskrit. The next section, Genealogy in Historical Languages, Linguistics, discusses some of the well-known arguments and pitfalls in the comparative historical methods. This section uses the illustrations to show some of the sound change laws which the historical linguistics have used to prove a point. The next section, Language Change from Old Indo-Aryan to Middle and Modern Indo-Aryan, presents phonological and lexicomorphological changes from Sanskrit to Pali, Prakrit, Apabhramsha, and modern Indo-Aryan languages, and points out problems in the well-known positions. In a subsection of this section, the author presents data from Bangla and Hindi, the 2 contemporary modern Indo-Aryan languages, and presents some conclusions which can be derived within parentheses on the lines of conclusions derived earlier by historical reconstruction linguistics. Close parenthesis. The next section argues for a common linguistic area, presents several views, and argues for a practical approach towards settling the questions related to the origin of Indian languages. In this context, the paper presents the current language technology scene in India and the benefits to be derived if a common origin for Indian languages proposed, unquote. And the 5 sections of your paper, they read Languages of India. That's the first one. The second one being, Languages of India, the scenes of language. The third one is Modern Indian Languages. The 4th one is Origin of Indian Languages. And the 5th one, which is Advantages of Common Heritage and Linguistic Area. And you end with the conclusion. So with that, I'll hand it back to you to kind of focus on maybe 2 or 3 of the sections or more, if time permits, to kind of put across that, on the challenge bit, and what is new and what are you actually challenging as part of your paper? Thank you.
Thank you, Meg. See, this whole, discussion on the languages of India, the origin of Sanskrit, the Arya versus Dravid, the Vedic civilization, the antiquity of it, and its comparison with the Indus Valley civilization, the whole theory of Proto-Indo-European and the allied concepts like Kentum languages and Shatam languages, and Sanskrit versus Pali Prakrit and other languages. All these controversies have been there, and they fail to die down.
Right.
I think the problem is that whenever you try to approach these issues, you will be labeled as one or the other, a person belonging to one or the other ideology, and etc. etc. I've been thinking of organizing a seminar in JNU on this whole concept of follow up from the symposium that we did in America. We thought we'll continue. But again, the moment you organize this seminar in School of Sanskrit and Indic Studies, people will think, okay, this is going to have a certain orientation. So these questions are still open, open and open because the scholars are unaware of the facts from bottom up, Indian languages. Indian languages are so many, and then they have been interacting with each other and very actively, from time immemorial. We don't know, nobody has an idea how long we have been here and how long we have been interacting. And the languages have interacted so intensely that languages like Manipuri, which is supposed to be from the Tibeto-Burman family. So we have two languages from Tibeto-Burman family. I'll come to that, Manipuri and Bodo. And, traditionally they are considered in the Tibeto-Burman family. So one of my students did a research. He is a Manipuri, and he found about more than 100 Sanskrit verb roots in Manipuri language. So, there are many more such facts which were either not known to the Western linguists, or they were, I would say, conveniently forgotten or ignored, etc., etc. We don't know what happened. So the problem is that there are a lot of facts about Indian languages, their interaction, and the commonalities, typological similarities, features, etc., which could be of use to us, and a lot of use to us. I'm a person for language technology industry, and that would be of a lot of use to us. We did, work together with Microsoft Research, where we found a common scheme which can tag all Indian languages. So it's possible to tag or understand or analyze all Indian languages in a common scheme, and that's possible, and that's quite advantageous for us. The problem is the scholars, whenever they want to address these issues, either they are not aware of the facts from the languages and the language areas, or they don't want to just talk about it. I'll mention several examples, particularly the example of Bangani language, which late 90s, it was actually, there was a field work done on Bangani language. I'll talk about that. But this paper basically challenges the historical methods that the scholars used in classifying languages and imagining Proto-Indo-European, which is, of course, an imaginary, supposed to be the imaginary mother of this big Indo-European family, spanning from India and Europe. And that was the idea, that this language family was imagined, and all of the language families, and languages descended from Proto-Indo-European. And so the methods were used, and examples were taken carefully, and the rules were explained through examples which supported the rules, and there were a lot of exceptions which were ignored. So basically what they did, they looked at the majority. So they collected some data, and if the majority of the words kind of supported the theory, the sound change laws, etc., etc., They thought it's okay. And if there were, a large number of exceptions pointed out by the critics, they thought it's because of the mixing and because of the contextual situations, etc., etc. They kind of ignored that. So my job was basically I thought, why not look at contemporary Indian languages, which are supposed to be, North Indian, Indo-Aryan languages, and then try to prove one as the mother of the other. Doing something similar, which of course is, just to prove that the whole idea was not done nicely.
Right.
The so-called scientific method was not practiced, correctly. So I'll take you through some of these, issues like Arya versus Dravid, the question of Vedic civilization and Indus Valley civilization, and Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, etc. Now, two issues which I have actually raised in my paper, that Sanskrit is the oldest Indo-European documented language that we have today, and Vedic is, no matter how late or early we kind of position the language of Rig Veda, which Parani calls the Vaidiki, and writes rules for that in his grammar. But the language is quite mature. The language that we get in Rig Veda is very poetic and quite in an exalted state. And that leads Kajanas to point out that when Rig Vedic language can be considered equal to the PIE, instead of pointing PIE at a higher state. And from there, the Western languages and Eastern languages through Iran, etc., just suggesting the west to east movement of the Aryan speaking people would be quite inaccurate. So no matter how early or late you date Rig Veda, the language kind of evolved. Certainly, it was a huge amount of changes. Language was changing, at a frantic pace, and trained grammarians before Panini tried to unsuccessfully, document the language. And Panini was the 11th grammarian who was actually able to complete the work, and he completes in two sets. He says the compositional language, Vaidiki, and Laukiki, that the language that he spoke. It's very obvious that there were languages being spoken. Panini calls his language Bhasha, right? And the grammar that he wrote kind of made that language Sanskritized, kind of standard language. So Sanskrit was a standard language which emerged out of Panini's documentation. So it's obvious that these languages, the Vaidiki and several Laukikis, were in practice in speech. And if you look at the area of India from Arunachal Pradesh, all the way up to Iran's border, was perhaps the big area that India had. And you can't imagine there'll be a single language. There'll be so many languages being spoken from Kashmir to Kanyakumari and from Arunachal to the borders of Iran. So obviously there were so many Prakrits being used. So if you start saying that the Sanskrit is the mother of these Prakrit languages, and while these languages coexisted, and the biggest proof is that in almost all of the Sanskrit plays, the educated people speak Sanskrit and uneducated people speak Prakrit. Like in Shakuntala, Abhigyan Shakuntala speaks Prakrit language, Dushan speaks Sanskrit language. So these languages are all actually contemporary languages. So and then the historical method has put Sanskrit as the root of Indo-Aryan languages in India, and it has derived Pali, Prakrit, Apabhansha, and then the modern Indo-Aryan languages from there. And then started doing a journey backwards from Sanskrit. And then, coming up to the Proto-Indo-European by historical reconstruction. And then see that PIE as the root of all these languages. And from there, we have two branches, the Kentum languages, the Western European, and then the Shatam languages, we have the Lithuanian, Balto-Slavic, and then the languages of India. Now, these theories were mostly academic in nature because textbooks were written, and there were powerful scholars, etc., and things were practiced. In fact, in one of my visits to UMass Dartmouth Center for Indic Studies, I was actually teaching a course called Sanskrit 101, very basic Sanskrit course. And
I see.
and I came across when I was actually touring some part of Boston. I came across some European guy. He said that, oh, Brahmins brought Sanskrit to India, and from Europe. That's what he said. And then I questioned him. He said, this is what we study in our textbooks, in schools. So the problem is that when the academic exercise was done in terms of discovering Sanskrit and looking at possible source of Sanskrit, these were documented nicely in textbooks, and this is what the kids in Europe read. And also, I'm sorry to say, in India also, our kids read something similar in their schools. So this has been there, and the idea of basically this seminar was to put things in the right perspective and discuss things nicely. So my paper basically targeted two things. First, the fact that Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit, Abhranshas, not Abhranshas, Sanskrit, Pali, Prakrit were coexistent. So it would be very difficult to actually derive one language, so to say, from another. This is what the classical historical linguistics would like us to do. And the Indian scholarship, which were inspired by classical historical linguistics, they also wrote the same thing. And the subsequent departments of linguistics in India, even the linguistics courses in the other language departments, they all followed the same principle. And so Indo-Aryan history, Indo-European history in Indian curricula basically followed the same path. Now, if you look at linguistically, the Vedic language simplified from a multiplicity of forms. We got fewer forms because the people are actually settling down, and then they're clearing forests. Agni is the leader in Nirukta. Agni is Agrarir Bhavati. So it's clearing forests, and we are settling down in larger areas. And we're settling down all over, not only in the north, but also in the peninsular India. So we have the word Dravida. And we're settling down at a frantic space. And then in that process, the language, of course, some forms will disappear, newer forms will appear, and it will be difficult for the grammarians to capture the change that is happening. And therefore, trained grammarians before Parani, that should be a good example that how frantically the language was changing in India, and that's very normal. Any multilingual society like India will have the same phenomena. Even today, languages are changing. You look at the speed, Hindi is changing, Telugu is changing, English is appearing. So languages are changing even today. And there was no difference at that time. So languages were changing, but this theory of Indo-European, Indo-Iranian, Indo-Aryan in India said that, okay, from Sanskrit, the forms simplified and we got Prakrit. So Satya, for example, would be Satya. People can't speak the conjuncts, they would make it a geminate, and Satya would be there. And that's, so it's not, if two people, for example, a person from village is not able to pronounce conjuncts properly, that does not mean his language is derived from the standard variety.
Absolutely.
It basically means the two forms are coexisting. For example, school is used a popular word in Indian languages. If Punjabis say school, that doesn't mean the school form is derived from school, right? So basically, when the Indo-Aryanists or linguists trained in that kind of discipline started saying that Vedic forms simplified to classical Sanskrit, and classical Sanskrit forms simplified to Prakrit and Pali. And Prakrit, Pali, we got Abhranshas to modern Indian languages, right? So that basically brings us to a difficulty, how to actually rationalize this. So I kind of took that route and to say that necessarily it may not be possible to justify Sanskrit as the mother of Pali and Prakrit. They might be coexisting, right? So similarly, if we have modern Indian language like Bangla and Hindi, they are currently spoken. And if you take the selective criteria that the lexico-morphological changes that come to language and sound changes that come to language, if we apply those kind of selective criteria, we can prove one language as the mother of another language. So that was basically to reduce the whole idea of selective application of theories to prove a point as absurd, and that's what I wanted to try. Right. So this whole question needs to be tackled afresh, and I would like to because there are a lot of new facts are emerging. I would like to bring newer evidence linguistically. Basically, there are so many facts emerging from the genetic studies of North Indians and South Indians, and of course there is a professor in JNU, professor of biology, and he was pointing out that he did some genetic studies on the Paswans of Bihar and the Kashmiri Pandits, and he found no difference between the genetic the signature of these two communities. I said, you're perfectly all right. Our texts have been screaming about that the Varna is a functional division, not a biological division. So people Brahmins and non-Brahmins and other things would be exactly the same biological stock. It's only that they have taken different professions. Right. So there's a lot of facts emerging, and these have to be brought in. Now, the question about the Indian languages and the differences in Indian languages and then families, etc., has been brought to the fore again with Bangani's question. Bangani is a dialect of Garhwali. Garhwali is a language. Garhwali itself is considered a dialect of Hindi as per the census of India. The population census of India is Garhwali has 12 dialects, and one of them is Bangani. And I think around 1995, a professor of linguistics from Norway, he's of German origin, Professor Klaus Peter Zoller. He works in Norway, but he is interested in the Pahari languages. So he keeps on doing field work. So he did a field work in Bangani language, and then documented, the dictionary of words, etc., etc. And I found so many Kentum, very distinctly Kentum properties in Bangani language, which is not supposed to be in India, right? It's not supposed to be in India. Right. Then that raised a lot of controversy, and some other people were sent to validate the data of Zoller, and then they said that this data is not good because Klaus Peter's fieldwork was not done properly. The two scholars who were sent to check the data, right? And then that led to more controversy. And in 1996, Dr. George Van Driem and Dr. S.R. Sharma were sent for fieldwork, and they reported that the Klaus Peter's data was actually spurious. But then, Professor Anvita Abe of JNU, who is a much more serious field worker, a well-known field linguist, she was sent to do repeat field work to look at Zoller's data, and she came back and she said the data was correct. Actually, Zoller's data was correct, and that led to a lot more controversy. And Professor Hans Hauck, who is a professor of linguistics in Illinois, where I was a student, and he then writes an email. That email could be obviously obtained from University of Michigan website. He says that looks like the Sharma and Driem did field work only in the fringes of the territory, and while Professor Anvita Abe went deeper into the territory, and her fieldwork data is much more stronger and perhaps tends to validate what Zoller said, and Zoller's forms are genuine. Now, if you have a Kentum language in India, then the whole idea of Kentum versus Shatam, falls flat actually. And Absolutely. then now the adherents of the into India theory are keeping quiet on Bangani issue. So wherever there is a there's an opportunity. People ask questions, and the proponents of the Into India theory will keep quiet on that. They will say, yes, data is there. We are looking at data, and we're waiting for more results. Now, look at this data came in 1996. And afterwards, I remember I was in Poland for a conference, and then I was giving a talk, and there was one gentleman, and he said that, Klaus-Peter Zoller's scholarships funding has been reduced, and he's getting hate mails, etc., etc. So there's a certain tendency in the world that if you oppose a well-established theory of Indo-Europeanness, which has been there for 200 years, of course. If you challenge something, then you have to have, you have to face consequences. So that is there. But I'm very happy that Professor Hans Hock has brought this back to the discussion again, and Professor Anutabi's data has been validated. Now I just got an email from Professor B that she said that you should talk about the language families in India. And traditionally, we have considered four language families: Indo-Aryan, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, and Tibeto-Burman. Out of our 22 scheduled languages, Indian Constitution does not talk about national languages, scheduled languages. And out of those, 15 are considered Indo-Aryan, 4 Dravidian, and 1 Austroasiatic, Santhali, and 2 Tibeto-Burman, Bodo and Manipuri. Now, out of these languages, there are one more family that Professor Abi wanted me to point out, Tai Kadai family, and then some Aham variety of language in Arunachal Pradesh is supposed to be in this family. And Andamani is that she worked on, so 6 language family. Andamani is, of course, the last speaker died, so I'm not sure if that language family can still be considered a living language family. So idea is that we have so many languages. The last census that we did 2011, that census points out to about 270 mother tongues and about 19,500 other languages, which the speakers are less than 10,000. So 270 mother tongues are basically those languages where there are speakers more than 10,000, right? And we have 121 languages, and of course, out of those, 22 are scheduled languages in our constitution. And I'm told 37 more applications are waiting to be included in the Indian Constitution. So we'll have about 59 languages if all of them are accepted. Now the problem is with so many languages and so much little resource to support them. See, our best bet would be to look for similarities across languages.
Correct.
And if we look for similarities across languages, it is easier to build technology. I'm a language technology person, and without language technology, we can't have AI, Indian AI, and without Indian AI, we cannot actually hope to develop faster in areas like health, education. We can't do education. We can't do other areas. And then, therefore, the idea is that we should exploit similarities. And in that context, people have talked about Masika, Colin P. Masika, in I think 1994, he talked about the difficulty in India to actually point one language as the mother of other language because of this mixing and a coexistence, and Sanskrit, of course, playing a big role. And M.B. Emeno was an American linguist who lived in India for more than 25 years in Kuppam, the Dravidian University. He worked on Dravidian languages. So nobody can be a better authority on Dravidian language than he is. And he says that, to his great surprise, he said that looks like India is a common, linguistic area. And that common linguistic area is because of so much of exchange that has happened. Right. And exchange is not only vocabulary. The 2 sets of vocabulary you borrow vocabulary and you inherit vocabulary. Sometimes the distinction diminishes because we don't know whether this vocabulary is borrowed or inherited. When I go southern India, I found more Sanskrit in South India than in the North India. We did a machine translation project, Ministry of IT sponsored machine translation project Sanskrit to Hindi machine translation project. And to our great surprise, we found there's a lot of difference Sanskrit to Hindi.
Right.
And I wish if we did Sanskrit to Malayalam, that would have been perhaps easier. Sanskrit to Telugu would have been easier. So basically, when you go deeper into the language question, you discover many more facts. Who is the Western, Indologists of the 19th century and the Indo-Europeanists perhaps were not aware of, I would say, because the Indian languages, you have to work in India to know the nuances of Indian languages, the share that they have gone through, the vocabulary exchanges, the grammar exchanges. If you look at the grammar book of any Indian language today, I don't want to highlight that the Parnis grammar was the basis for the Tolkappiyam. But if you look at any modern Indian language grammar today, just to pick up from the shelf Gujarati grammar or the Malayalam grammar, etc., you will have a very clear imprint of Siddhanta Kaumudi or Panini. Right. So that is an advantage to us. If languages have borrowed from each other, have been influenced by each other, there is an advantage. And we should make sure that we build technologies which support more than one language. If you have to build technology for all 270 mother tongues, how much money will be needed, right? So if we can build a common course which support more than one language, that is an advantage. Look at the 100 verb roots of Sanskrit in Manipuri. Let us explore that further. If Manipuri could have more than 100 Sanskrit verb roots, it would have much more vocabulary, actually. Till date, we don't know how much of Indian Sanskrit vocabulary is there in all Indian languages. Some rough counts in Malayalam has 75%, Tamil 48%, etc., etc. But recently we were doing some kind of rough statistics. So if you have about 100,000 word Indian languages word, you'll see about approximately 70% would be common across Indian languages. The rough statistic that we have found. And common means tatsam and tadbhav, both, not only tatsam. So if 70% vocabulary are common, and there are a lot of linguistic similarities, like verb final, all of them have a lot of inflections, the derivation processes are very similar, and the negation of verbs, etc. So many features are common across Indian languages, and that needs to be exploited. And that needs to be exploited.
Correct. I think this is a very, very important point, and therefore I think I'm taking the liberty to interject, Professor Jha. And for the audience who are listening, and if I'm correctly understanding you, Dr. Jha, you're saying that in part, while in the early 19th century, there was a focus, early and 19th century and thereafter, a focus to look at differences, how to separate these languages. Continuous focus on what's different, what is different. And by itself, that might not be a wrong thing to do. But at the same time, what I'm hearing you say is not enough effort has gone to see what might be actually similar also. And that also is a very legitimate academic enterprise, so to speak, as legitimate perhaps as spotting differences. Is that a reasonable understanding of your emphasis on the need to looking at similarities?
Yes. I would say that we should look at the whole question afresh, and perhaps envision something like a Bharatiya Bhasha Parivar, Indian language family.
Wonderful.
And then, not put so much of emphasis on what has been done earlier, because that lacks a lot of data support. And then perhaps that would be a better idea. So I wanted to very quickly take you through the Aryan Dravid controversy. The word Arya, if you, can I share my screen very quickly? Because I want to show things.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love that. I'm sure it will be useful for the audience as well.
So let me very quickly share my screen here, and I'll go to my server. So can everybody see my screen?
Yes,
here?
I can see it.
Good.
Yeah, I can see.
If I search this thing, so I want to search word Arya. In Rig Veda. So you find a lot of references, right? And none of these references, if you go deeper into it, none of these references talk about race as such. So there will be no better evidence. The first book of human civilization is talking about Arya, and they're talking about very clearly, right? So you should see that. And second, you search the word Dravid. You will not find in Rig Veda. You will not find in any of the Vedas. And the first time you find it here is in the Mahabharata. And Mahabharata, that in the Sabha Parva. You see, Pandyansha, Dravidansha, Sahitans, Chol, Keral, Andhra, and then Kaling, Ostkarning, all of them are being referred. It's very clear. It's very clear that this meeting is going to happen, and we are now inviting our people who are living in different areas, just like today, Biharis, Bengalis, Punjabis, etc., to come over and have a discussion. So there's basically as a regional connotation, Dravid, Chol, Kerala, etc., etc. So there's no need to, assign racial overtones to these things.
Correct. And as you just said, it is Dravid, Chol, Kerala as separate things. They are not all under Dravida.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this is very interesting. There could be no better evidence than this. And people have talked about that Dravid has come from Damila, from some Ceylonese chronicle. So I think Mahabharata is certainly earlier than Ceylonese chronicle. So this should be cited as the evidence of the word Dravid, first occurrence of the word Dravid. Excuse me. So this is, there are so many other examples. I wanted to show that, Agni, for example, is a very important word, and Agni has hundreds of references. And if you do a Nirukti of Agni, it says, is leader, that which is a leader. Agnani Bhavati, leader. So Agni is, clearing forests. We are settling down. We are settling down in a larger area, north and south. And when we settle down, we mix with people. We have language exchanges. And language, of course, will be changing at a faster rate. And grammarians before Panini were trying hard to get a grammar of the language. And Panini was the only guy who was able to actually document it. So things are very logically there in Indian tradition, and we should try to look at it from, I would say, the bottom up, taking bottom up perspective. Look at the Indian languages today in a detailed way, and then see what similarities come up and how we can put together some kind of familial connections. That would be a much better exercise than top down, where there is no data. Proto-Indo-European has no data. Basically, it's all fictitious.
Correct. Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I think the points that you're making should at least generate, if not anything else, generate interest for people to look at these more critically. And I couldn't agree more on the need for newer, fresher perspectives and to do it rigorously. Before I read the conclusion of your paper out, I would like to just pick your mind on a couple of things, right? One is, as a linguist yourself, as a trained linguist yourself, James Claxon, and I'm not citing him verbatim right now, though it is there in the book, and I've cited it in his paper. I've cited it in our papers. He makes, I think, also an important point that comparative linguistics, the method of this comparative method, right, by itself cannot yield any absolute chronology information. At best, it can maybe yield some relative chronology. Just this comparative method itself cannot give you 2000 BC, 1500 BC, etc. I'm guessing, I mean, what do you think? Do you agree with Professor Claxon over there?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with him. See, the laws of the sound change and historical methods, for example, Grimm's law, Werner's law, and the new grammarian hypothesis, all of them have been, working on selective data.
Correct.
And whenever there were opposition and then the exceptions, they were conveniently glossed over. So, for example, the pa-ta-ka evolving into fa-tha-ha in Germanic languages, and the voiceless fricatives becoming voice fricatives, etc., etc. All of them, have been done very carefully to certainly, prove a point. Now, I think in 1998, perhaps there was a dictionary called, created, which had about 681 verb roots. And it's called the LIV, Lexicon of Indo-Germanic Verbs, done by Rix in 1998. They had 681 reconstructed verb roots.
Right.
And again, most of them were did not follow the actual scientific method. They would have either just one family or two family. You should have more than three families, at least to compare, to get a good conclusion. But again, the methods that they have used are always, questionable. And
Yeah, I hear you in the sense that looking at the other paper by Angela Marcantonio in this book, I think she makes the point that you're saying very clearly with regard to exceptions and how the exceptions are not actually sufficiently handled. And at some point of time, questions can be raised whether it is really a law or not, because everything is being changed around to kind of fit the data rather than actually looking at the hypothesis. So it's very fascinating that this book has come out and both of you edited it, and I think there's a lot of new information and new work needs to happen on this field without any ad hominem attacks or without any generalizations, but very specific and detailed work. Is there anything else that you would like to add on the Arya Dravida portion? Or should I read the conclusion before taking your view on how you think we should look to the future? If there are any people who are interested in linguistics or working on those aspects, I would like to kind of understand from you, from an institution point of view, what might have been the reasons why new work is not happening, and what might be ways to kind of to think. I'm sure that keeps you awake in night, or at least some nights. So before I ask these questions, is there anything else that you'd want to add on the Arya Dravida bit?
Yeah, see, Arya has been a very controversial word, but in India it's not controversial. Arya means someone, the word root re gives you the word Arya, and it stands for speed, profession, knowledge, etc. And it has a niyat suffix, and then you get Arya. Similarly, if you see the Dravida, the Dru is the root, and sense of water, prosperity, strength, honesty. So if you go at the deeper semantic level, there's a lot of similarity, in the meanings of both of the words. And if you keep aside the race, which is not a question in India, then they are the same people. Looks like there's a Proto-Indic family from somewhere, and the Proto-Indic family gave rise to the North and South Indic, and and then these language groups actually evolved. And of course, a lot of exchanges happening among them. So what needs to be done actually, that the Indian linguistic departments, have to be a little bit more realistic and try to use our theories. For example, Panini's grammar. Bloomfield in 1929, in his very famous book, Language, says that Panini's grammar is the greatest monument of human intelligence. But the bigger statement that he makes, it is an indispensable model for description of languages. When 1929, Bloomfield says that Panini's grammar can be used as the default model for describing any human language. So why Indian departments of linguistics are not using Panini to describe languages? So if we use, for example, we collect data from the fieldwork. We come back and start analyzing the data. Why not use Panini's method for at least morphology and phonology part of it? That would be easier, and that would be much more plausible, because when people are actually trained in Sanskrit, and you can get easily trained in Panini's grammar methods and do it. That's one thing. And otherwise, if you have theories like Indo-European and Indo-Aryan, etc., Indo-Iranian, and if there is a counter argument by linguists like Bangani, and such counter arguments should be also highlighted. And our own linguists, even though they're aware of it, are keeping quiet and not voicing their concern on this. So I would say that we should now wake up a little bit. And linguistics is an empirical discipline. We deal with facts. And if the facts are pointing to something, we should talk about it, right? And if so that should be the goal, basically.
Absolutely, I think that's very interesting. So what you're saying is, you said wake up. We need to wake up. We need to look at our own, indigenous methods, even if we don't stick only to it. But surely there's no reason to not include it. It can be one of, at least to start with, one of other ways of doing it, and over time that could throw up interesting results. In fact, in one of the papers that I had written with my co-author Manogna Shastri, we see evidence for there was a large-scale database analysis related to Sanskrit and Tamil, for instance, and the data is actually, the analysis is actually showing up results which is inconvenient for this Indo-Aryan and Dravidian hypothesis, so to speak. But the authors say that, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not stating it verbatim, but they say to the effect, though the data says this, it is inconvenient because the hypotheses say that, and therefore we will leave the data and we will stick to the hypothesis. So when such things happen, it's quite shocking. At the same time, on the one side, it is claimed to be a scientific discipline, but at the same time, there are these kind of approaches that one sees. So great. I think what you're saying is, there is a problem, and we need to wake up, and we can't wait for others to solve that problem. We need to ourselves take that initiative and start getting involved in a more focused and in a more rigorous way. I'll maybe read out the conclusion of your paper. There is a lot more to your paper and to your work and to you than all of this, but I hope this would be maybe kind of a taster for people who are coming across your book or your paper or your points of view for the first time. And maybe somebody would take this forward in the directions that you've just envisaged. So the conclusion reads, and I quote, "The paper, while presenting the well-known problems with the comparative historical methods in the Indian context, argues that carefully selected data can be used to prove any point. In this context, the author has highlighted the fact that the whole argument of genealogical relationships in the Indo-European family be re-examined, taking insights from areal and typological features of the Indian languages. The paper ends with some related arguments on the Aryan-Dravidian controversy and suggests a common origin, Proto-Indic over Indic, for these two language families, so far assumed distinct from each other." I want to repeat this line. The paper ends with some related arguments on the Aryan-Dravidian controversies and suggests a common origin, Proto-Indic, for these language families, so far assumed distinct from each other. To emphasize this point, the author has given evidence from the language technology industry, which has clear benefits from the common features and a shared heritage. So with this, we are 2 minutes away from the end of today's conversation. I would like to once again thank you very much for making time from your busy schedule. As you said, quote unquote, onerous task and a very important task. We wish you the best. Is there anything that you would want to say at the end as we close this conversation?
No, actually, as this new assignment of creating vocabulary, scientific and technical vocabulary in Indian languages, see how much of the role that I have, in making sure that the common thread runs through. That helps us, we don't have to create vocabulary in all languages, but it already exists. So what I've suggested that if, for example, there is an English word which is very, very popularly used in Hindi, and we don't have a word for that in Hindi, so why not look for Tamil and Telugu, Malayalam? If they have a word, take it over in Hindi. So all Indian languages must exchange vocabulary, right?
Wonderful.
And therefore, that brings them together. So this is what I'm going to, that's why it's a very important and onerous task, certainly.
Wonderful. At INDICA Center for Bharatiya Languages, we are very, very glad that we had you today talking on Bharatiya Bhasha as a family together, and the need to kind of start seeing similarities as well. I couldn't agree more that it's high time that we do this. Thank you very much, Professor Jha. And the seminar that you mentioned that you wanted to do in JNU, I hope it happens somewhere and more people, come together and we can kind of see what new directions can emerge. Once again, my best wishes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Pranam. Thank you.